Have you ever wondered why millions of people feel restless, empty, or trapped inside themselves, even when life appears fine on the surface? What if the struggles you face are not signs of weakness, but invitations from your own psyche to awaken? Tonight, we explore the hidden dimensions of the mind, where your true self waits beyond masks and denial. The invisible split between what you consciously know and what you suppress unconsciously, the pressures of modern life that drain meaning, not courage, shadows you avoid that repeat pain until acknowledged, the masks you wear that create profound loneliness, suppressed emotions ticking silently beneath your daily life. The process of individuation, where struggle becomes the path to wholeness. Step with me into the depths of the psyche, where what seems like suffering is actually the compass pointing toward your most authentic self. There is a division within the human psyche that few recognize, yet nearly everyone suffers from it. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive as a dramatic collapse. It grows quietly, invisibly, as a widening distance between what a person knows about themselves and what they refuse to know. This is the silent split between the conscious and the unconscious. The conscious mind is proud of its clarity. It identifies with reason, intention, and control. It says, "This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I want." Yet beneath this orderly surface lies a vast psychological territory that has not been consulted. The unconscious carries everything that did not fit the image a person was allowed or willing to become. Emotions that were inconvenient, desires that were judged, fears that felt dangerous, truths that threatened belonging. When these elements are rejected, they do not vanish. The psyche has no wastebasket. What is pushed away descends into the unconscious, where it continues to live with its own energy, its own logic, and its own urgency. And this is where the split begins. The conscious personality moves forward believing itself whole, while the unconscious moves in the opposite direction, carrying what has been abandoned. This inner separation is not harmless. A divided psyche cannot remain stable for long. The unconscious does not remain silent forever. It speaks in symptoms. It speaks in anxiety that has no clear object, in sadness that arrives without explanation, in sudden irritations, compulsions, and fatigue that seem disproportionate to life's visible demands. These are not malfunctions. They are communications. Modern life encourages this split. Society rewards the polished surface and has little patience for inner complexity. A person learns early which parts of themselves are acceptable and which are not. Strength is praised, vulnerability discouraged. Certainty is rewarded, doubt concealed, and so the conscious mind adapts, while the unconscious accumulates what adaptation required to be sacrificed. Over time, the conscious attitude becomes narrow. It clings to its chosen identity and resists anything that contradicts it. Meanwhile, the unconscious grows dense with unacknowledged material. The greater this imbalance, the more forcefully the unconscious will attempt to restore equilibrium. This is why breakdowns so often arrive after periods of apparent success. The psyche does not measure health by achievement, it measures it by wholeness. What makes this split especially dangerous is that the individual usually identifies entirely with the conscious position. They say, "This is me," without realizing how much of themselves has been left behind. And what is left behind does not disappear into nothingness. It becomes autonomous. It influences behavior indirectly, shaping choices, reactions, and relationships from behind the scenes. One sees this when a person repeatedly acts against their stated values, when intelligence is undermined by self-sabotage, when love is desired but intimacy is avoided. These contradictions are not moral failures. They are signs of an unconscious that has not been integrated. The conscious will may speak loudly, but the unconscious holds the deeper authority. This split also produces a peculiar sense of emptiness. When a person lives only from the conscious standpoint, life becomes mechanical. There is efficiency but no vitality, direction without depth. The individual may function well, yet feel internally absent, as if something essential has gone missing. This absence is not imaginary. It is the loss of contact with the deeper layers of the psyche where meaning originates. The unconscious is not an enemy of consciousness. It is its necessary counterpart. When ignored, it disrupts. When acknowledged, it compensates. The tension between the two is not a flaw in human nature. It is the very condition that makes psychological development possible. But when the tension collapses into repression, the psyche fractures inwardly. This is why inner conflict should not be rushed to resolution or silenced with distraction. The presence of tension indicates that something within the psyche is seeking recognition. The unconscious is pressing upward, not to destroy the conscious personality, but to expand it beyond its current limitations. And in that pressure, one can already sense that this split is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a deeper psychological movement that continues to unfold. The modern individual is often accused of being fragile, unmotivated, or incapable of enduring hardship. Yet this judgment misunderstands the true nature of the suffering that defines our age. What is breaking people today is not weakness of character, but the gradual erosion of meaning. The psyche can endure extraordinary pain when life feels purposeful. It collapses not from effort, but from emptiness. In earlier cultures, myth, ritual, and shared symbols offered a framework through which suffering could be understood. Pain was not merely endured, it was interpreted. Life unfolded within a symbolic order that connected the individual to something larger than personal ambition. Today, those symbolic structures have weakened or collapsed. In their absence, the individual stands alone before the vastness of existence, expected to generate meaning privately while living in systems that actively discourage inward attention. This produces a peculiar contradiction. People have more comfort, more information, more choice than ever before, yet feel increasingly disoriented. Comfort soothes the body, but it does not nourish the psyche. Information fills the mind, but it does not provide orientation. Choice expands freedom, but without meaning, it becomes a burden rather than a gift. The psyche does not ask first for ease, it asks for direction. Modern society teaches individuals to define themselves almost entirely by external markers: career, status, appearance, achievement. These are not inherently harmful, but they are insufficient foundations for identity. When a person is reduced to what they produce or display, the deeper layers of the psyche remain untouched and unrecognized. Over time, this produces an internal hollowness that no amount of success can fill. This hollowness is often mistaken for laziness or lack of discipline. In truth, it is a loss of psychic energy. Libido, in the psychological sense, flows toward what feels meaningful. When life offers no symbolic depth, no inner resonance, energy withdraws. The individual feels tired not because they are incapable, but because the psyche refuses to invest itself in what feels empty. Technology accelerates this condition. Constant stimulation fragments attention and flattens experience. The psyche requires silence, symbols, and depth to generate meaning. Endless noise leaves no space for inner images to emerge. Without inner images, there can be no living connection to purpose. The individual becomes reactive rather than reflective, occupied rather than oriented. Furthermore, modern culture has little tolerance for inner conflict. Discomfort is quickly pathologized or anesthetized. Yet conflict is not always a sign of illness. It is often a sign of psychological growth attempting to occur. When conflict is suppressed rather than understood, meaning cannot be formed. Meaning arises from the tension between opposites, from the struggle to reconcile inner contradictions. Remove the struggle, and meaning collapses with it. This is why so many experience anxiety and depression without an obvious external cause. The psyche is responding to a life that no longer speaks its language. Symptoms emerge not as defects, but as protests. They indicate that something essential has been excluded from conscious life. The individual is not failing at life. Life, as structured, is failing to address the needs of the psyche. To live without meaning is not merely unpleasant, it is psychologically destabilizing. The human being requires a sense that their existence participates in something enduring, something that transcends immediate gratification or social approval. When this dimension is absent, the psyche turns inward and suffering intensifies without clear direction. What must be understood is that meaning cannot be manufactured through slogans or imposed goals. It emerges organically when the individual's inner life is allowed to interact with the outer world. Modern life, however, often severs this interaction, privileging function over depth, efficiency over significance. In this environment, the loss of meaning is not an anomaly, it is the predictable outcome of a world that has forgotten the symbolic dimension of human existence. And from this loss, further psychological tensions continue to unfold. Every human being carries within themselves a shadow, a part of the psyche that is often unacknowledged, disowned, or feared. It is composed of everything we have been taught to reject. Impulses deemed unacceptable, emotions considered inappropriate, desires labeled dangerous, and traits that contradict the identity we have carefully constructed. Yet the shadow is not a mere collection of flaws. It is a repository of vital energy, of truths about ourselves that we cannot access without facing it. To avoid the shadow is to invite repetition. The recurrence of suffering informs both familiar and insidious. When a person refuses to acknowledge their shadow, the psyche does not simply disappear the unwanted material. The unconscious has its own laws and rhythms. What is suppressed does not vanish. It simmers beneath the surface, shaping thoughts, feelings, and actions in subtle yet persistent ways. These hidden patterns express themselves indirectly, often through behavior that contradicts conscious intentions. One may repeatedly attract toxic relationships, sabotage opportunities, or provoke conflicts that echo unresolved inner tensions. Each recurrence is not random, it is the shadow signaling that its contents require recognition. The shadow manifests as repetition because the psyche is seeking completion. Every encounter with pain, disappointment, or conflict presents a potential mirror of the unintegrated self. When a person fails to confront these inner truths, the external world continues to present similar situations. This is not punishment, it is opportunity. Each recurrence carries the possibility for insight, provided it is met with awareness rather than avoidance. Avoidance, however, ensures that the pattern will persist. The more one resists, the more the shadow asserts itself, often with greater force and in increasingly intricate forms. Fear underlies this avoidance. To face the shadow is to confront parts of oneself that challenge the carefully constructed identity. It requires humility and courage, for the shadow often reveals aspects of our nature that are uncomfortable to recognize. Anger that has been denied erupts in unexpected ways. Jealousy, envy, or resentment emerges in relationships, seemingly out of proportion to the situation. Traits that are suppressed within the conscious personality are projected onto others, producing conflict and misunderstanding. Projection, in this sense, is the shadow's insistence that we see what we have hidden. This dynamic explains why history, both personal and collective, tends to repeat itself. Individuals, families, and even nations carry shadows that, if unrecognized, manifest through recurring mistakes, cycles of suffering, and patterns of destructive behavior. What is ignored internally is enacted externally. The shadow is patient. It waits for attention, not for judgment. It does not demand punishment, but it will continue to assert itself until it is integrated. Integration of the shadow is not a process of eliminating undesirable traits, nor is it an endorsement of all impulses. Rather, it is the conscious acknowledgement of what has been denied. By bringing the shadow into awareness, the individual gains access to energies and insights that have been locked in unconscious repetition. Pain is transformed from a recurring torment into a guide, revealing the hidden dynamics of the psyche and offering pathways toward wholeness. Avoidance is seductive because it appears safe. People distract themselves with busyness, social approval, and external accomplishments to bypass inner confrontation. Yet this safety is illusory. The shadow waits, persistent and insistent, and it will find expression in ways that cannot be ignored indefinitely. Until it is confronted, the patterns of repetition will continue, often in increasingly dramatic or painful forms. In understanding the shadow, one begins to see that the pain repeated throughout life is not arbitrary or meaningless. It is a language of the psyche, signaling unresolved inner realities. Repetition becomes intelligible when recognized as a reflection of the avoided shadow. And as the shadow is engaged, the cycle begins to shift. The energy that once fueled unconscious suffering becomes available for conscious life, allowing choices to be made from awareness rather than compulsion. The shadow, therefore, is not enemy, but teacher. Its persistence is the psyche's insistence on wholeness. Each repetition of pain, each encounter with familiar struggle is a summons to consciousness, a summons that continues to unfold as long as avoidance dominates the inner landscape, and it is within this ongoing dynamic that the next layers of psychological transformation quietly await. Each of us moves through life wearing a mask, a carefully constructed image designed to meet the expectations of society, family, and peers. This mask, which I call the persona, is not inherently false. It is necessary for functioning in the social world. It allows interaction, cooperation, and survival. Yet beneath its surface, there lies a tension that few recognize. The persona is simultaneously protective and isolating, a necessary tool that conceals the deeper self from both the world and often from the individual who wears it. The persona is not a private creation. It is molded by the collective. Society imposes norms, values, and ideals that shape the way an individual must present themselves. From early childhood, one learns which behaviors are acceptable and which must be hidden. The result is a mask that aligns with cultural expectations. It grants approval and facilitates belonging, but it also restricts authenticity. The more a person conforms to the collective ideal, the further they may drift from their inner truth. This adherence to social expectation produces a subtle, pervasive loneliness. Even when surrounded by others, the individual may feel isolated, for connection occurs only through the mask. Genuine selfhood is deferred, hidden behind layers of performative behavior. Relationships are formed and maintained with the persona rather than the underlying individual. A conversation, a smile, or a gesture may appear authentic, yet it often reflects the social script rather than the inner reality. Loneliness is not merely the absence of others. It is the absence of oneself in the presence of others. The collective masks are reinforced by a world that prizes appearance over substance. Success, attractiveness, and competence are measured externally, and deviations from the ideal invite judgment or exclusion. The individual learns that their inner experience, anxiety, doubt, creativity, desire, may be unsafe to reveal. In response, the persona becomes increasingly rigid, a defense that preserves social acceptance while deepening the inner divide. The very act of protection becomes a source of inner tension. What is most troubling is that the individual often comes to identify entirely with this mask. They may believe that their persona is who they truly are. In doing so, they surrender access to their authentic self. The inner world, rich with instinct, emotion, and imagination, becomes unexamined, even unrecognized. This neglect fosters a subtle psychological malaise, a sense of emptiness, fatigue, or dissatisfaction that cannot be remedied through social success or external achievement. The mask may shine, but the soul behind it remains dimmed. The dynamics of the persona are further complicated by collective forces. Groups, movements, and cultural currents amplify certain masks, encouraging conformity and discouraging divergence. Individual expression is often judged against shared ideals, and the tension between the inner self and collective expectation is magnified. One may sense a pervasive undercurrent of inauthenticity in daily life, as the majority navigate the world through the lenses of borrowed identities. This is the loneliness of the persona writ large, a society composed of individuals who have surrendered their internal truths in favor of socially sanctioned masks. The persona is not merely an obstacle, it serves a vital purpose. It allows individuals to operate within social structures, negotiate power, and achieve practical goals. Yet its utility comes with a price. By investing too much energy in maintaining the mask, one neglects the nourishment of the inner self. Psychological growth requires moments in which the persona is set aside and the deeper layers of the psyche are acknowledged. Without such engagement, the inner life remains stunted and the loneliness deepens despite outward success. In observing the persona, one begins to see the paradox of human social existence. Connection through masks produces both belonging and isolation. The more a society emphasizes uniformity, the more individuals must conceal their uniqueness, and the more profound the solitude behind the mask becomes. Within this tension, the psyche quietly signals the need for integration, an engagement that continues to unfold as the individual navigates the interplay between their inner world and the collective expectations that shape the outer world. And it is within this ongoing tension that the next layers of self-discovery quietly emerge. Within the human psyche, emotions are not merely fleeting reactions. They are the language of the unconscious. They convey truths about our needs, fears, and desires, signaling where attention is required. Yet in modern life, many of these emotions are suppressed. Anger that feels unsafe, grief that seems inconvenient, desire that appears forbidden, all are pushed aside, denied expression, or ignored. At first, this suppression appears manageable, even necessary for social harmony or personal composure. But the psyche does not forget. Suppressed emotion accumulates beneath the surface, latent and potent, like a time bomb whose mechanism is hidden from consciousness, yet whose energy demands release. The danger of suppressed emotion is that it continues to operate unconsciously, influencing behavior, thought, and perception in ways the individual cannot recognize. A person may present calmness, reason, and composure outwardly, yet internally, the psyche is alive with unresolved tension. The energy that might have been expressed, processed, or transformed is diverted into subtle forms of distortion. Relationships become strained, decisions feel inexplicably heavy, and moods shift without obvious cause. Emotional suppression is not inactivity, it is energy misdirection, a pressure that continues to grow silently. Suppression often begins early. Children learn which emotions are acceptable to show and which are dangerous. They discover that anger may lead to rejection, sadness to ridicule, or desire to punishment. Over time, the psyche internalizes these lessons, creating a pattern of concealment. The individual becomes adept at masking true feelings while functioning within the social world. Yet this skill, while adaptive on the surface, seeds future turbulence. The emotions that are denied expression do not vanish, they persist, seeking acknowledgement, forming the potential for sudden eruption. This latent force can manifest in multiple ways. Sometimes it emerges as a sudden outburst, anger, rage, or despair appearing disproportionate to the situation at hand. Other times it appears in subtler patterns, chronic anxiety, somatic complaints, or repetitive negative thoughts. The time bomb analogy is fitting, for the pressure of accumulated emotion is like tension in a tightly coiled spring. The longer it is repressed, the more intense its eventual release. The psyche is relentless in demanding recognition of what has been denied. Suppressed emotions also shape unconscious projections. Traits or impulses that are denied in oneself are often perceived and criticized in others. A person may react with hostility or suspicion to qualities they secretly possess but refuse to acknowledge. In this way, emotional suppression not only distorts internal experience, but also warps perception of the external world. The time bomb is not contained. Its influence radiates outward, shaping interactions and circumstances. The social environment intensifies this process. Modern life frequently discourages reflection, introspection, and emotional exploration. Work demands, social performance, and cultural ideals reward composure, productivity, and distraction. There is little space to confront the depths of the inner world. The suppressed emotions, therefore, accumulate in isolation, their energy intensifying over time. The psyche, unable to integrate these experiences naturally, relies on indirect methods to restore balance, often through symptoms, dreams, or sudden emotional crises. Importantly, the time bomb metaphor should not evoke fear of destruction alone. It also points to potential transformation. Emotions, when engaged consciously, release energy, insight, and creativity. They illuminate aspects of the self previously hidden, guiding the individual toward wholeness. Yet until they are acknowledged, until the psyche is given permission to speak, the pressure continues to build, silent but undeniable, shaping life in ways both subtle and dramatic. And the unfolding dynamic of this suppressed energy prepares the psyche for the deeper work that follows in the ongoing journey of self-awareness. Every human struggle carries within it a hidden potential, a doorway to a life more complete and more fully realized. This process, which I call individuation, is the unfolding of the self through conscious engagement with the depths of the psyche. It is not a simple correction of flaws, nor is it the pursuit of superficial happiness. It is a profound alignment of the conscious personality with the unconscious, an integration of what has been denied, projected, or ignored. In essence, individuation transforms suffering into insight and conflict into a path toward wholeness. Individuation begins with recognition. The individual must confront the realities of the inner world, the shadow, suppressed desires and emotions, the tension between persona and self. These elements are often experienced as obstacles or pain, yet they are the very material from which the psyche constructs wholeness. The struggle itself is not accidental. It is the language of the unconscious, signaling what has been fragmented or neglected. Resistance is natural, for the psyche confronts the individual with truths that contradict familiar patterns of thought and behavior. Yet within these confrontations lies opportunity. One of the central aspects of individuation is the dialogue between opposites. Consciousness tends to favor order, clarity, and control, while the unconscious carries ambiguity, instinct, and emotion. Individuation does not seek to suppress the unconscious, nor to surrender entirely to it. It seeks a dynamic balance. The tension between conscious intention and unconscious energy fuels growth. Each confrontation with internal contradiction, each encounter with discomfort becomes a catalyst for the expansion of awareness. The psyche gradually integrates aspects of itself that were previously disowned, and the individual gains access to new layers of insight and creativity. Individuation also demands courage in the face of the persona. The masks we wear, shaped by collective expectations, provide security and social acceptance, yet they obscure the self. To individuate is to see beyond the persona, to acknowledge the authentic self beneath social facades. This often requires navigating conflict, misunderstanding, and isolation, as the outer world is rarely structured to accommodate the emerging individuality. The struggle is not external alone, it is internal, requiring confrontation with deeply ingrained patterns of thought, feeling, and reaction. The effort itself, however, is inseparable from the reward. The process reveals the extraordinary intelligence of the psyche. What appears as suffering, confusion, or repetitive difficulty is in fact an intricate guidance system. Dreams, symbols, emotions, and life events serve as signposts toward the self. Individuation is not a linear path, it is iterative, cyclical, and dynamic. Progress is measured not in perfection, but in increased awareness and integration. Moments of pain and resistance are inseparable from moments of insight, for they are the tension that brings the psyche into alignment. Individuation also reorients the individual toward a larger perspective. As the unconscious is integrated, one experiences a sense of continuity with the collective, not as imitation, but as participation. Archetypal energies, long suppressed or unrecognized, emerge as sources of creativity, purpose, and depth. One comes to understand suffering not as a personal failing, but as a universal condition imbued with meaning. The struggle itself becomes a conduit for connection with self, with others, and with the broader dimensions of life. Through this ongoing process, the human being discovers that the cure for inner fragmentation is not imposed from without, nor achieved by simple avoidance of difficulty. It is hidden within the struggle itself. The pain, conflict, and tension that once appeared as obstacles are revealed to be instruments of transformation. Each challenge carries the potential to illuminate shadowed areas of the psyche, to release suppressed energy, and to expand consciousness. Individuation is the path by which life's inherent difficulties are transformed into vehicles for wholeness. And as this dynamic continues, the journey of self-realization quietly unfolds, leading deeper into the unfolding exploration of what it truly means to become whole.